Hi, welcome back to the media stage here at the GovAI Summit in Arlington, Virginia. It is 2025. The world is changing rapidly, and we are here to talk about the advances in AI. And my guest this afternoon, as we record here, is Tyler Warden, who's SVP of Products from Sonatype. Glad to be with you.
Glad to be here.
Now, Tyler, just for those who maybe don't know who you are or don't know who Sonatype is, just give us the high-level pitch.
Sure. So, Sonatype, we focus on open source, so open source software components, and recently over the past couple of years, open source AI models. And by focusing on them, what does that mean? It means we help organizations adopt them quickly, safely, without having to really trade off between going fast and being secure. You can do both. So helping organizations really manage and operationalize their open source AI software supply chain.
Okay. And here in the government kind of sector, things are changing obviously rapidly at the moment, particularly with the federal approach to security when it comes to software. What are some of the opportunities you're seeing at the moment for AI to really strengthen that security, particularly around the resilience of the government's supply chain?
Yeah, I think that there is both the use of AI itself and how AI can help adopt a more secure posture, right? So in the use of AI itself, especially the open source AI world, by adopting open source models that are community driven, there's a lot of innovation that can be unlocked there. And then there's a real, I think, mandate and responsibility to do that securely and safely. So what models are you going to use? And I think that goes beyond just traditional security, but also in terms of where is data being sent, how is it being used, there's ethical, legal, other sort of concerns there. Then I think on the overall security side, there's, I heard a guy say one time that, you know, bad guys have AI, but good guys have AI too, right? And so we're on the good guy side of it. That I think that yeah, right. But there's a lot of tooling and techniques and capabilities that you can kind of level up your own game and your own organizations with AI, automation, that sort of stuff.
With so much experimentation happening in this space at the moment, lots of new tools coming in, people want to be able to trial the latest thing. They want to be able to accelerate their innovation. But that acceleration, you know, can also bring in new risks. I think people worry about that. If you were talking to federal leaders here, either at a federal or a state level, who are thinking about bringing new technology in, and they're thinking about integrating, for example, AI-generated code that may have come from these models, whether that's open source data or closed. Just how do you think about how to do that safely? You know, particularly if they're integrating it with what can be quite mission-critical things.
Sure. What I think it starts with is policy. And policy might be not the most sexy word, but I would spin it on its head to think about policy as an accelerant, that there's a certain amount where, like, if a federal leader also on the side owns a nightclub, right, there's the certain ones that the bouncer just wouldn't let in. Maybe they're not from the right region or they're untrusted. So there's this certain level of policy, but once they're in, I think there's really powerful ways with, again, that policy word to wall off certain areas of data, certain connectivity sets, whereby experiments can be really controlled, and by using policy, you get to manage by exception, right? And so by managing by exception, you can set, these are the worst we don't want in, these live in an experimental area, then these are approved for production. So there's very, I think, logically simple gates that can be applied, and we find that the best first step is to figure out what is an absolute no-go, and start there, because that eliminates a lot of this gray area. If we know we can't touch these, so let's not even think about it. Let's start working in these areas.
Does that just apply to code in this instance, or is that all content?
I would say it's all content. It's the models themselves. When it comes to code, what we like to say is it doesn't matter what or who writes it, the standard should not be compromised. So the code needs to be secure. It needs to be using the best open source dependencies. It needs to be generated. That need for scanning and identification and code standards doesn't go away. In fact, it's actually more important now. With more code being written, that is outpacing the pace of things like security reviews and other areas. AI can help make that up. So if AI is generating the code, other AI should be checking that code, scanning it, understanding it.
That's interesting. Say more about that, because this idea of AI is checking the work of other AIs. Some people might seem like the human is even less in the loop, and therefore there's more danger presented by that.
So I think that just like there are we use the word in software development, personas or users in the business, right? You have people that wake up every day that are writing code. And you have people waking up every day that are worried about securing that code. So think about application security and developers. Well, just like they wake up every day, they're bringing their mech suit, they're bringing their agents, they're bringing their AI with them. And so the humans are in the loop in both places, but they're persona specific, right?
Right.
So you hear a lot of academic, like red teaming this and that. But really, I think that if you model the personas you have today, your AppSec people and professionals are going to bring their AI to check the code written by the AI coding assistants. And that check and balance is as important today, maybe even more so than it always has been. There's a reason that code reviews exist. There's a reason that people are motivated differently. And that healthy friction is what gets the end result. But I don't think it takes humans out of the loop. It empowers every human to keep up with the others.
Okay, that's good. That's helpful framing, because we all have this idea of kind of digitally twinning the organization's data, and what you're actually saying is it's not just digitally twinning it kind of this conglomerate brain, but it's actually the individual roles inside of the team.
That's right.
Having their own support systems. I like that a lot.
That's right. That's right.
Now, when it comes to kind of the best practice in this space, I think agencies are trying to think about how do they verify kind of the provenance of these tools and particularly the models that they're using. What are some of these kind of best practices or safeguards that can be put in place for that?
So I would, at a danger of going too much into a metaphor, I like to advise.
We like metaphor.
Oh, we do?
Metaphor.
Okay.
This is good.
So I like to advise organizations that if you remember, if anybody went to business school, you probably learned about the Toyota production system and Deming, who talked about how managing a supply chain more effectively leads to better outcomes. So I would apply those Deming principles to what you do. Let's take just three of them. First, Deming would say choose fewer, better suppliers. Okay. Now, he was talking about brake pads and stuff, but let's talk about choosing fewer, higher quality models or tools. Okay. Leads to easier to manage, better outcomes. It's also knowing where those are at every step in the process. And now that's the hard one. Where are they being used? How are they being adopted? And then not passing defects downstream. So if you have a kind of a multi-agent flow or you have orchestration, being sure that one agent or model automation workflow, let's call it that, doesn't pass a defect downstream a defect could be data, could be bias, could be anything. Isolating that and bringing it back to the source as closely as possible. So taking those concepts and whatever they mean for your processes and your business and the people you work with and the politics that you're working through, that is choosing fewer, better suppliers, knowing where the AI is being used, and not passing defects downstream. It's those interconnection points where a lot of the breakdown can happen.
Fruit of the forbidden tree,
that's
to
right.
mix our metaphors slightly.
That's right.
Important
That's right.
there.
I love
just on that point, though, about choosing fewer, better suppliers, I think the space is moving at a real clip right now.
It is.
So how would you choose those better suppliers? Like, what are even some of the judging criteria exactly that you would even put
I
against
would say start off with solving a real problem. I think there's a lot of AI solutions looking for a problem, not the other way around.
That's right. Yeah.
I'm sure like yourself in this space for a while, and about 4 years ago, you would see, if you go to a big conference like a RSA, say for example, you would see AI on like 10% of the booths. Yeah. Last year, every booth had AI on it, which is like no booths have AI on it. So like we got to slap AI. So is there a problem you need to solve? So start off there, right? Yeah. Does it solve the problem? And then there's certain criterion that we like to look for, which is if it's open source. So first of all, closed source versus open source is a big decision point, right?
Okay. Say more about why that is.
Right. So closed source, there's typically a financial incentive model behind who's ever building it. Who's ever building the tooling, the organization is financially motivated to do a good job.
Sure.
Right? If it's open source, it's driven by the good of the community, right? So community members pour into it. And I think there's philosophy about why one will work over the other. It's that one's free and one costs up front. But a community that's open, there's, I think, been a lot of literature and academia about openness could lead to more secure because everybody can see it. Everybody knows what's happening. So you can do a deeper dive on open source. And then you can get into, if you go into that, especially in government, where are people contributing to the open source from? Right. So there's harder to control, but you can see what's going on. Right. Yes. So there's a software supply chain versus closed source. If it's closed source, then there's due diligence about the organization and their belief system and how they work. We focus at Sonatype more on the open source world, and I would say in there, while there's a lot of benefits from open source, there is likely a tighter supply chain need to understand if you can see everything that's happening, but also anybody from any place in the world with any intent can contribute. So you got to have more visibility into that.
And of course, there's even this kind of even grayer middle ground of the closed source companies creating open source versions, models, OSS, for example, from OpenAI. Where do you see those models exactly in that framework? You know, is that something that federal leaders should be thinking about? Maybe I should be trusting something that's come from one of the big studios, but it's been put out into the open source domain. Maybe that's a better way of utilizing it in the future.
I think that's a great way to start with experimentation to understand if that's an organization you would want to work with or a model that you like. Meta with Ollama is very, very similar there. Now, they don't do that largely out of the goodness of their hearts. As somebody who puts out an OSS version of the software, I do that to get users so then I can sell more. Now, while I do want to contribute to the community because we do want to give back, it is part of their funnel, but it's a great way to experiment, and it is a really nice mix between somebody who has a real commercial brand, mouths to feed incentive of making a model good, but also the openness of open source leaves you full depth and breadth and visibility into what's being used, and that can be a really nice mixture when your focus should be on the mission, right? Not on contributing to the models. It allows you to put more focus back to the mission.
Okay. You heard it here, folks. Beware the free gift with purchase. They're luring you in. Okay, maybe in closing, let's just think about kind of looking ahead, because this stuff is moving so fast. If you were to peer into the crystal ball, how do you see the role of AI really evolving in response, particularly to this kind of supply chain threat area, which I think is a real challenge for people? What steps can federal agencies be thinking about taking today that's going to address that vulnerability that might kind of become systemic in a couple of years' time?
What I think you're going to see is more importance put on deep analysis behaviorally of how these models are made and created and used. So you're going to see, I think, more inputs and insights into how models have evolved over time. As it's moving so fast, there's not a lot of history here. So what you start to develop, I think, is a history of past performance, what has worked well in the past and how those models are evolving. And I think AI could do really helpful analysis and suggestions in where these models could be going, but I think you're going to see more predictive use of, hey, we don't like where this is going behaviorally, with lots of different inputs in there to get ahead of threats before they even hit you. Okay,
so keep an eye on the future by constantly reevaluating what's going on. Great. Well, thank you so much for taking your time to be here and for joining us here at the GovAI Summit and at the media stage, Tyler. Thank you much. Tyler Warden from the SVP for Products at the team at Sonatype. Thanks so much.
Thanks very much.